Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to JFF's national webinar on the role of apprenticeship intermediaries. This is Eric Sells-Now. I'm Senior Advisor for JFF and Director of the Center for Apprenticeship and Work-Based Learning. And we're very happy you could make some time today to join us for this webinar on the role of apprenticeship intermediaries. I think we all know that over the last several years in the United States, apprenticeship intermediaries have taken a larger role in the apprenticeship system, come from many different backgrounds, many different types of intermediaries, and we thought it helpful to get a number of national experts on the line to have a discussion on the emerging practice and roles of apprenticeship intermediaries. I'm joined on the webinar today by Daniel Vallejo, who is the Deputy Administrator of the Office of Apprenticeship for the U.S. Department of Labor. After Daniel, we're then going to have a fascinating panel with Jerry Ghazi from Vermont High Tech and the American Institute for Innovative Apprenticeships, and Shelley Weir of the American Hospitality and Lodging Association, and Jeff Forrest, who's with the College of the Canyons in California. So we'll get to them shortly. Before we do that, let me just tell you a little bit of pre-conference discussion here about the topic, and then we'll bring in Daniel for a conversation. That's me, Eric Sells-Now, with the Center for Apprenticeship and Work-Based Learning. Today, we want to give an overview of apprenticeships in general, just to make sure our knowledge base is equalized. Talk about the critical role of intermediaries, go to our panel discussion, and then try to get in some Q&A with you attendees at the end. And there was time during the conference for chat and taking questions, so we're able to do that as well. So that's the agenda for today. Many of you on the call, but perhaps not all of you, know about JFF. And JFF is a nonprofit, national nonprofit organization. We've been around for about 35 years. We design innovative solutions. We scale proven program and try to influence industry action and policymaking to do transformative impact in the system of education, training, workforce, and employment. And we work with a lot of different stakeholders on that. Here with the Center of Apprenticeship and Work-Based Learning, we're part of the JFF family. And, you know, we work with a lot of organizations across the country. You can just a screenshot of our website, Center for Apprenticeships at jff.jff.org. Plenty of resources on that site. You should, by all means, check it out. The Center for Apprenticeship and Work-Based Learning, I mean, our overall strategy at this point is we want to engage intermediaries to help market apprenticeships and empower intermediaries to provide support to groups of employers, leverage federal and state resources, educate stakeholders, encourage industry credentials and academic credentials, and of course foster pathways for underrepresented populations to access apprenticeship. So, you know, largely our Center for Apprenticeship and Work-Based Learning is known as a place to go for a lot of different resources when you do your research on programs. We have resources on youth and diversity and intermediaries from a lot of different places, so we hope to be a one-stop shop for that. And we're also working with a number of employers, a number of states, and a number of intermediaries across the country to advance apprenticeship. So before we go too much further, let's just, most people on the phone know this, but we're talking about registered apprenticeship. We realize there's a new industry-recognized apprenticeship program coming out of the U.S. Department of Labor in the coming weeks or months. Many of you heard about the Secretary's Task Force, the President's Executive Order, and the establishment of this new program. We don't know enough about it yet. There'll be guidance put forth by the Department of Labor, so we can't talk too much about it today because we don't know that much about it. But whatever it is, intermediaries will probably play a role. We're just not certain which ones yet. So for the purposes of today's conversation, we're going to be talking largely about the registered apprenticeship system, but also this can apply to other forms of work-based learning and learn and earn programs. So as you all know, there's 5 core components of registered apprenticeship. Apprenticeship is a job. Somebody has to be employed, getting paid. That is the first step. A lot of people don't understand that. They call a lot of different programs apprenticeships when they're not really apprenticeships. They're internships or other work experiences. So apprenticeship means you have a job and you're getting paid. That's the foundation of the program. As part of that, you have on-the-job learning with supervision and mentoring, and that on-the-job learning for registered apprenticeship is roughly 2,000 hours a year. A little bit of flexibility there thanks to our friends at state apprenticeship agencies and the Department of Labor. As part of that, there is related training and instruction, often called RTI, related technical instruction. That's about 144 hours is recommended a year, but of course, you can do hybrid models or competency-based models that can sometimes shorten that time. So again, there's flexibility with that too. You have to check with your state and get that approved by your apprenticeship agency, state or federal. Part and partial to apprenticeship is rewards for skill gains. So as an apprenticeship, it may come in at an entry-level salary. As their competencies and skills increase, as their production increases, they should be rewarded for those skill gains with some sort of wage progression. So a bump up of $1 an hour after year one because they've now gone from basic skills to medium skills. And so rewards for skill gains is an important feature of apprenticeship, that wage progression. And lastly, the program has to end in a national occupational credential, one that is portable across the country. Many occupational credentials are built into apprenticeship programs, but ultimately you're getting a national credential in apprenticeship demonstrating mastery from whatever the apprenticeship is. You get that from your state apprenticeship agency, or you're getting that from the U.S. Department of Labor. So those are the basics of apprenticeship we're using as our framework here. Let's just a quick overview of apprenticeships, and we've got several slides here that are a little bit similar, but this is from a paper on JFF website on 7 ways intermediaries help with apprenticeships, and intermediaries conduct industry engagement and outreach, aggregate the demands of employers within industry sectors, bringing multiple companies together, which we think is the strongest and most useful job of an intermediary, is to bring multiple companies together in an industry sector and work with them across company to develop, aggregate their demands, their skill needs, their competencies, and craft an apprenticeship program. Connect business and industry to groups of different partners. I think most of you know that a lot of these apprenticeship programs are regional ecosystems of an employer or several employers, maybe a community college, maybe a community-based organization, maybe your workforce board, maybe economic development, but there are groups of these folks typically working together at the local or regional level. Intermediaries help build relationships with community colleges or other training providers who can help bring the related technical instructions. Intermediaries sponsor apprenticeship programs, and we'll talk a little bit about sponsoring a program versus an intermediary that sponsors and does more than that. Intermediaries support apprenticeships progress, and of course, it's always good if they can research and document their successes and promising practices on that. Over the last several years, I think you all know that apprenticeship in this country has increased about 42% in the last 4 or 5 years, strongly supported by the Obama administration at the highest levels of government and also by this current administration. And so as a result of this continued energy and effort, there's a number of new types of intermediaries that are emerging in the marketplace. We know historically that labor has played an important role, and if you look at the traditional intermediary role, it's for the past 100 years mostly been labor. Labor has organized employers, found the pipeline of workers, connected with training providers, either themselves, community colleges, or other providers. So they have been the ultimate intermediaries and have had a great model of doing it for years. Also, other people are in the game. So industry associations, and you'll be hearing from AHLA later on today, but industry associations, we see doing some really interesting work in bringing their industry groups together and advancing apprenticeship. A lot of community colleges have gotten in the game of being intermediaries, not only sponsoring programs, but taking a larger role. Harper College outside of Chicago is one in particular, Lone Star down in Texas, and today we're going to hear from Jeffrey Forrest with College of the Canyons, where he'll talk a little bit about what their college and Goodwill has done to be an intermediary. Workforce boards have gotten into the game, not a lot of them, but it's growing every day, and I always think to the West Michigan Workforce Board, West Michigan Works, and their great role in healthcare IT, where they became an intermediary out of a sector strategy project they were doing in healthcare IT, and they're on their 4th or 5th cohort by now. Community-based organizations, often consortia and groups of local organizations come together to sponsor apprenticeships. And then new in this country, but certainly in the United Kingdom, there's private, for-profit apprenticeship providers, apprenticeship service providers, and certainly in Germany and Switzerland, there are groups of business groups, chambers of commerce, and others who come together to advance apprenticeship. In UK, there's these apprenticeship service providers, and so we see in the US a couple of companies initially based in Europe who've come to this country to be intermediaries as well. And of course, the Department of Labor has put out a number of grants for industry intermediaries over the last couple of years. Actually, there were contract manufacturing intermediaries, hospitality and lodging intermediaries, IT, and elsewhere. You can see that on DOL's website. So big role of intermediaries is technical assistance, guiding employers through the design and, most importantly, the administrative tasks to establish a registered apprenticeship. They help market apprenticeships, work with employers to adopt apprenticeships, conduct or arrange for the related training, and assist employers to register their programs with the state or their feds. Now, I don't want to understate that one, that particular thing. A huge role that intermediaries play is, organizing employers or even working with one employer and helping them complete the required paperwork, identify the standards, complete forms that state apprenticeship agencies or the U.S. Department of Labor requires, and making it easy employers, basically taking whatever burden there is, which is often overstated, but I won't go there today, but doing that for the employers. Doing everything to make the development of apprenticeship easier for employers, and registering the programs at the state or federal is a really good good product to offer, so to speak. And then, they often provide TA in sort of setting up the training there. So intermediaries provide a lot of assistance, and particularly intermediaries, some are by industry. So there might be a manufacturing or technology association or a local or state hospitality association, or maybe national or federal, but certainly industry or national, but certainly industry associations have gotten the game, and other business groups as well. So I hope I've probably spoken too fast and thrown a lot of information out there. Let's just say that employers sponsor apprenticeship programs today. That's how you become one. Somebody has to step up and be the sponsor of record, to fill out the paperwork, to register the program, and do that. In the history of apprenticeship, it's often been the employer, or perhaps a joint management or some sort of labor project. Today, in the past 4 or 5 years, we say a growing group of people who can do that work, community colleges, workforce boards, and others. But again, being smart about the industry, and being experts in the industry is one really important thing. Being experts in how the employment and training and education process works. And, one of the most important things you'll hear later on in our conversation today is the absolute importance of knowing your state apprenticeship agencies and staff, and knowing the federal processes and how to register programs. Critically important. Can't be a really successful intermediary sponsor unless you know how to do that. So enough with me talking. It's probably been too long. What I'd like to do is interview Daniel Vallejo as my first guest today, and Daniel is a Deputy Administrator for DOL's Office of Apprenticeship. He oversees the policy and expansion efforts of the National Apprenticeship System, and is tasked with leading these efforts across the U.S. and in the territories. Daniel's been in the apprenticeship business. He's a former apprentice himself, and he's been in it in California, in the state of Washington, and now with the Department of Labor the last few years. I'm going to introduce Daniel momentarily. Before I do that, I just want to inform the audience that we've had some technical problems in recording Daniel's remark. So we'll pick him up about midway through his presentation. So that's not a glitch you'll hear. It was a technical problem on our part. We'll just continue along with Daniel's presentation. What he's talked about at this point is how happy he was to join us in this webinar, how important he thinks intermediaries are to expanding of apprentices in the United States, and how he's seen a number of emerging different groups get into the apprenticeship intermediary space. So with no further ado, let me introduce in mid-sentence Daniel Vallejo, Deputy Administrator, USDOL.
A deep well that they could tap into. That's a very important trait. In addition to that, their capacity to take on the quantity of information that has to move through their system in order to be able to facilitate these conversations and move them into the appropriate parts of the Department of Labor or, you know, whatever machine they happen to be interacting with, is also a critical component. And what we see, what I'm seeing around the country, those program models that are succeeding at the greatest level are really focused on inclusion, including everybody, communicating clearly, making sure that they're not, you know, kind of internally facing in terms of their data, but rather that they're really sharing as much information as possible and creating open conversations, because that ends up creating a broader ecosystem for them and giving them the ability to serve more people faster and really fine-tune their operations. The other successful factor is their ability to track to data, you know, to provide data that demonstrates that they're actually doing things that are successful. That's the other kind of wedge that they need to be able to deliver on.
Great, thank you. And I'm reminded by one of our participants that, yes, even there's high school youth apprenticeships going on in this country, and in Missouri and other places there are some high school programs on which they're intermediaries as well with their local employers. So, so a lot of diversity out there in the types of apprenticeship intermediaries there are. So Daniel, my last question to you really is, you know, there's a lot of conversation about some of which, frankly, we think is a little bit exaggerated, a little bit myth or misperception, although I'm sure some folks on the call may disagree with me. But, you know, registration is an onerous process. It's too hard for an employer to do it themselves. And so a solution for that certainly is the rise of intermediaries to make it easier for employers, and I'm sure some of our other guests will talk about that. So what's your thought about the role of intermediaries, aggregating, bringing a bunch of employers together and making it easier for them?
I think that's exactly right. That's one of the functions that they do play, is trying to help employers streamline these processes and outsource basically to the intermediary some of the elements that they would have to commit internally to learning these processes. You know, as an employer, if you're busy producing, you know, your widget, whatever it happens to be, and you need a technically capable workforce to do it, you don't want to have to build a whole other internal machine to understand how to interact with the workforce development system and the Department of Labor and the registration process, et cetera. So if you have somebody that can come alongside of you and really provide that focal point for your organization and interact with your human resource people or whoever it is that they're interacting with, to make that as easy as possible, that's a win for everybody. And yes, we've heard loud and clear from industry that the registration process is too long, too big, too much paperwork, et cetera. So our teams are diligently working to revamp that, and the Secretary will be making announcements soon about the modernization of our registration process. And I think everybody will be really excited about some of the work that we're doing.
And certainly intermediaries can help. And so, you know, we're getting some questions about, gee, what's it going to look like in the future once you make an announcement about the new IRAP, industry recognized apprenticeship process. I think we agree that we wouldn't get into that because not all the work is done on that, but certainly that will be expanding it to other industry associations and others who can get into the game. Isn't that right, Daniel?
Absolutely. It represents an opportunity for additional intermediaries or even our existing intermediaries to grow their footprint. And I think that people will be pleasantly surprised if they read the report that recently was released by the Secretary's task force and submitted to the President. They'll see that many of the issues that face the registered system are being addressed through this model. And one thing, I think the only point that I would make on this webinar, because it's focused on registered apprenticeship, the Secretary has been true to his commitment that the registered apprenticeship system would not be watered down or diminished because of the creation of a new industry-driven model. As a matter of fact, it should be strengthened by it. And so we're fully aware of the concerns that are out there, but we think that we're going to be in a much stronger place to make a very solid case for the registered apprenticeship system to continue to grow.
All right. Well, we look forward to learning more about that. Maybe we can have DOL back for another conversation once that gets rolled out. I'm just reminded, Daniel, by my good friends in New Jersey at the New Jersey Institute of Technology as a 4-year program. They are also active in intermediary, and there are 4 years, I think a growing community of 4 years who are looking at and thinking about getting into the apprenticeship system. So lots of different, from high schools to community colleges to 4 years to workforce boards, community organizations and associations. There's lots of folks in this game. Daniel, we want to thank you for your time. We know you're busy over there, right down the street from us here in Washington, D.C. So I want to thank you for joining us today. We'll let you get back to your work. Thank you, Daniel. And I think we're going to move to our next conversation with Jerry Ghazi. Thanks, Daniel.
Thanks, Eric.
All right. Jerry Ghazi, founder of the Institute for American Apprenticeships at Vermont High Tech. Jerry has been a stalwart in the apprenticeship business probably for about the last 20 years or so, and maybe I'm being generous. But Jerry runs a premier intermediary through Vermont High Tech and some of his other work out there in the field. So Jerry Ghazi at Vermont High Tech, welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Eric. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to the audience about really what we considered the gold standard for intermediaries. When we founded, or I founded Vermont High Tech 20 years ago, the goal of it was to provide a gold standard to actually serve the employer. So everything was focused on the employer and was employer-driven. I come from 30 years of working in business from the employer. Vermont High Tech was founded from within inside an employer and then spun out as a nonprofit. So Vermont High Tech is a nonprofit. And so thank you for having me today.
Sure. And, I'm probably not going to stick to the script we spoke about because we hit a lot of topics already. But I just, you've been in this space for a while in the early days before apprenticeship was being talked about so much, in the early days of intermediaries or maybe the beginning of intermediaries. So I just want to get some of your general thoughts, Jerry, about what's starting up. What does an organization need to think about when they're starting to even consider being either a sponsor of groups of programs or an actual intermediary that does this work? Any thoughts about startup and the beginning stages?
Yeah, absolutely. So the one key factor that always has to be kept in mind is the employer. So if you do it from an employer's perspective, then you can take on small pieces to begin with and then build your organization. So over 20 years, Vermont High Tech has actually done every single aspect of a workforce development cycle, especially within the registered apprenticeship system. So we founded it based on registered apprenticeship. So 20 years ago, our first courses that we delivered, our first programs we delivered, the foundation was registered apprenticeship. Also, the foundation was guaranteed employment. So what we had is an employer walking into a classroom or a group of employers and giving every single individual a job offer on day one. And that is the connection that we had with employers. So everything had to be basically formulated from employers. So we do everything from the recruitment model for employers to the selection model of the apprentices, to the actual education of the apprentices, to the actual mentoring of the apprentices. They may want us to hold them on our employment, so we'll be the employer of record, or they might want to actually transition them from potentially a temporary agency to their employment. We act as their sponsor, so when they don't want to be the sponsor, we step in and say, sure, we'll be the acting sponsor for you. And we act in both New Hampshire and Vermont, one being an OA state, one being a SAC state. So you have to become intimately familiar with the apprenticeship system within your own state and also the public workforce system. And so the crucial aspect of having those 4 key roles that actually are played out in an apprenticeship system, which is employment, the sponsorship or administration, the public workforce system, and most importantly, the education provider, all those 4 roles, if you can see yourself acting on behalf of the employer in one or any of those roles, you'll start growing your intermediary business. So for instance, we actually do sit on the Workforce Development Board in Vermont, so we can advocate for our employer partners there. We actually sit on the Apprenticeship Council, so we can advocate for employer partners in that. We are actually partnered with a college, so we can actually bring college credit to the actual delivery of it. And the most important thing is we let the employers drive what we are going to be. So if the employer actually has already an internal education process and an internal education delivery system that they're using, we let that take precedent over our own education delivery. And so what we do is, and one of the key aspects as you think about growing your intermediary role, is take a look at every single aspect of what the role could be for the employer and have those deep conversations. It'll be different for each employer. And have those deep conversations with the employer on what do you want us to provide, what would you like to do as part of the workforce development solution, and then what would you like to take on? And also be open to the transformation of that role between yourself as an intermediary and the employer. As I speak today, we have one employer in New Hampshire, Dartmouth-Hitchcock, which is taking on their own role now as becoming a registered sponsor. For the last 3 years, with 250 apprentices under our belt, we acted as their RA sponsor. We acted as kind of the program director in the administration. We acted as the technical provider of the instruction. They now are taking that internally. And so they are actually saying, Jerry, okay, we want to register our own standards, and they actually did that. We want to register these occupations, so we help them do that. And they then stand up on themselves. And the most important thing about that is the self-sufficiency. So you take as an intermediary the role of transforming an employer through a workforce development process, which is registered apprenticeship. It's just a workforce development solution. You help that employer transition themselves so they can self-sustain it into the future.
So Jerry, let's broaden it out a little bit across the country and just talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of intermediaries. I mean, what are the skills and knowledge they have to have? You referred to a little bit about, you better know your state apprenticeship agency or your federal DOL process standards. You talk a little bit about what makes a good intermediary. There's a lot of new people in this space, a lot of folks who have previously not been experts in apprenticeship, and Jeffrey, I'm probably going to ask you the same question as a college, but talk a little bit about what someone needs to know in Nevada or California or Michigan or wherever, if they can start one up.
Great question. I think the most important thing that you have to have as part of your team is a group of individuals who want to learn, because you'll never possess all the knowledge necessary to support your employers. It's an ever-evolving process. So, for instance, one of your employers may want to start off at a state level, and they may be in the SAC state, so you have to familiarize yourself very quickly with the SAC regulations. Does the regulation state that RTI is required or is only recommended for the 144 hours? A misstep there could drive an employer to make a decision which they may later want to undo because it wasn't the right decision for that employer, right? So you start familiarizing yourself at a state level, but then all of a sudden the employer says, hey, I want to go to another state because I have another facility. Can you help me out there? Then you got to switch gears and say, okay, is it a similar state? Is it another SAC state? Or is it an OA state? Is there reciprocity? So really learning as you go with that employer and developing your strategy side by side with that employer is crucial. The other key aspect is not only do you have to have a true passion for learning as you go, but you have to have a true passion for teaching as you go, because you do want to create self-sustainability in the processes that you create through registered apprenticeship at that employer or multiple employer sites. So as you gain knowledge, you're sharing that knowledge with your employer. And that is one of the crucial aspects of it. So you have the standards, you have the regulations, et cetera, you have that context. You also want to do a deep dive into the workforce, the public workforce system within your given state, and truly understand the aspects of where could potential funding come to help offset those costs for the employer. And you want to be an advocate of those funding sources. The strength of an employer's voice at a table is second to none. If you go there as an intermediary, and again, we're a nonprofit, and we sit at the table advocating just from a nonprofit's intermediary perspective, we have a smaller voice. But we show up with 5 or 6 of our employers saying, look, we need bigger investments, larger investments in the RTI, and we need larger investments in the OJTs that are being created through registered apprenticeship. I got these 9 employers here. They're going to guarantee employment. So how can we better align the workforce system and the funding available to it? So you have to truly understand that aspect of it. Also, on the flip side, you have to understand the education side and truly understand where the educators are coming from. If an employer wants to partner with a community college or a third-party provider, you clear the pathway for that. You help them develop the RTI and ensure that the RTI is reflective of what the employer truly wants to do.
Sure.
Because once you step out, that employer really needs to become self-sufficient in the process for the longevity of registered apprenticeship.
Right, and you know, there's sometimes an advising role. Sometimes it's with a single employer. Sometimes it's with groups of employers. Does it make more sense to, you know, as we often say, aggregate the demand, bring multiple employers together for a single apprenticeship program? I guess as a sponsor or an intermediary, you would need to do that. I wonder if you could talk just a little bit more about that.
Sure. As part of the A through Z workforce development kind of process, we work with employers. We identify their immediate openings. And if we have a group of employers that have immediate openings that registered apprenticeship could fill, we'll aggregate them together. But if we have one employer that has, let's say, 100 openings, we'll give a focus on that given employer and help them solve that particular problem. So what I advocate and recommend is you always start with an employer or group of employers who truly are going to invest in the employment aspect. Many employers we've dealt with that now are kind of on our secondary tier have said, yes, we need them. We definitely need the employment. There's a skills gap. We can't find the right people. But when it came down to them making a commitment to actually sponsor apprenticeships, they backed away from that. They said, our business is just not ready yet. We don't have the demand on the business side to bring on those new employees. So what you do and what I advocate for is you always start with the employer or group of employers that have those immediate job openings, and then focus your attention and your energies on bringing the economies of scale. I think Daniel talked about that. Employers don't want to actually do responsibilities or actually take on tasks that others can perform for them so they can focus on their primary business, which is either producing products or offering services. But you want to tread lightly there because sometimes they want you to take on some of the aspects of it. Sometimes they want to take it on. So the most important thing is to figure out whether it's a collective group of employers or a single employer where they fit within the ecosystem of registered apprenticeship, and then bring the economies to scale. I think that Daniel made a great point. Imagine if every single employer who wanted to access a public workforce system had to learn on their own how to actually create and negotiate OJT contracts or ITAs, right? But you as an intermediary can go on behalf of one or multiple employers and create a whole system for accessing those dollars for the employer. So all the employer has to do is provide the data to support their requests, and you actually do the paperwork. And we've done the A through Z. We've acted as the agent to the Departments of Labor on behalf of the employers. We sat down with employers and helped them fill out their paperwork, or we've educated the employer so they can go from A through Z themselves. It all depends on what the infrastructure within that employer can sustain.
Sure. So, Jerry, you're a mature, not only a mature individual, you're a mature intermediary, if you will, at Vermont High Tech. There's a lot of new folks in the game out there, so I think your counsel is, know your employers, know the responsibilities of sponsorship, know the public workforce system, know the state apprenticeship agency, know the federal requirements, and make sure you know the partners, particularly educational RTA providers, so you can craft and customize programs to meet employers' needs. With that, and in the interest of time, Jerry, thanks so much for your time. We'll probably be coming back to you with some other questions. We want to move all the way across the country to California. Jerry, thanks a lot. And we're going to go to my friend Jeffrey Forrest. Jeffrey is Vice President of Economic and Workforce Development at College of the Canyons in Santa Clarita. And I just learned what Jeff has been doing lately out there as a new, maybe not so new intermediary, but somebody who's a growing intermediary out in California, has some unique partnerships. Jeffrey, welcome very much.
Thank you so much.
All right. So again, I'm going to throw the script a little bit to the side and just sort of get your observations. How did you guys get started as a community college in this space? Who are your partners, and what have you been able to accomplish?
Great. And again, I want to thank Jobs for the Future, and I want to thank you, Eric, for hosting this event. This is really a very important role in the area of making apprenticeship happen, just not in California, but through the United States, throughout the country as well. In terms of College of the Canyons and the community college in general, we really were given an opportunity to become a participant in apprenticeship through a statewide grant issued through what we have, what we call the Chancellor's Office. It's called the California Apprenticeship Initiative Grant. And what that grant does is it seeks to incentivize or jumpstart apprenticeships by partnering, by creating partnerships between community colleges and employers. And so we reached out to an employer here in the LA area to see if they would be interested in working with us in applying for that grant It's a logistics firm, a very large one, and they said most definitely. They came on board, and with 13 apprentices, we applied for the grant, and we were awarded the grant, and all of a sudden we became an apprenticeship sponsor. And so, having never done apprenticeship in the history of the college, this was all brand new, and so we were thrust into this intermediary role. So allow me to share some of the very critical skill sets that an intermediary should have when they're coming into this particular role, and then talk a little bit about the Strong Workforce Apprenticeship Group as a partnership and some of its achievements. Some of the things that I have learned in this role is, one, you have to be a relationship builder. You have to love people because you're going to be interfacing with them a lot. Second, you have to be great at customer service. You have to know what it takes to deliver exceptional customer service. You have to be able to manage your time, manage your priorities, but perhaps the most important skill set for an intermediary who's going to come new, if you will, to this particular role, you have to be able to listen. You have to be able to listen to employers, listen to workforce development boards, and listen to all of the constituents that make up the apprenticeship/workforce development ecosystem. Now, the Strong Workforce Apprenticeship Group, which was founded as a result of this grant funding that we received, it's a partnership. It's a partnership between a community college, College of the Canyons, and a community-based organization, Goodwill Southern California. I, along with Tracy D. Philippis, the Sector Strategies Manager for Manufacturing at Goodwill, founded SWAG. And this is how we make apprenticeship happen. We provide advisory services to the workforce development boards in the area, to community colleges, to companies, of course. We also make sure that we align with the state initiatives. For example, we have something here in California called Doing What Matters for Jobs and the Economy that seeks to expand career training and education. We align with those particular metrics. In addition, we engage companies and employers to understand the value of apprenticeship. We do not sell apprenticeship. We inform companies of the value that can be gained for their operations by considering apprenticeship as an option for growing their own talent and building a pipeline of talent for their own workforce. Also, we help organizations that are stuck in apprenticeship in terms of trying to implement it. We help them develop and implement their apprenticeship systems and their apprenticeship models. One example is the AeroFlex model that we were able to work with and help develop. Also, we are working with another institution, West LA College, in the area of developing a certified nursing assistant apprenticeship. And so we engage in the development and implementation process. Also, with the advisory services, we do also provide advisory services to the United States Department of Labor and the Urban Institute. We work with them in terms of refining and revising work processes to update them to what industry needs. And so that's how we make apprenticeship happen.
All right, Jeff, let me interrupt just to ask you a question. So not an easy thing to do to go from 0 to 60 doing that, right? You weren't in that space. You know, you were incented by the California Apprenticeship Initiative grants. How did you get smart in that? How did you get staff who were competent in that? Was it your partner who brought a lot of apprenticeship competency? I mean, you have to know something about standards and employer agreements and all the requirements of the registered apprenticeship system. So talk a little bit about how you or your staff or your partners got smart enough to be able to do this work with employers.
Absolutely. My partner, Tracy D. Philippis, had already brought several years of apprenticeship knowledge, having been a sector navigator in this particular space. And then I myself really became I became immersed in finding out everything I possibly could about how apprenticeship works. And I'm a systems thinker, and so this was perfect for the way in which I think. And so I looked at all of the requirements for the United States Department of Labor. I studied WIOA. In fact, I have the actual WIOA legislation. It sits on my desk. For those who are interested, it's 399 pages, in case you're interested. In addition, I studied the Division of Apprenticeship Standards, working closely with them. And so it was really a baptism, if you will, in really immersing myself in all of the compliance issues and policy issues and guidelines that were necessary to really be able to move the needle forward and make apprenticeship happen. So we looked at the standards that the Department of Labor issues, that boilerplate that they provide, also the Division of Apprenticeship Standards, the state association or agency. We really went through all of them with a fine-tooth comb, making sure we fully understood the information, the lingo, the terminology, and that's another important component of being an intermediary. You learn a new language when you get into this particular frame of this particular type of work. And so you have to be really skillful at mastering the language, mastering the terminology. There's a lot of acronyms that are often used in terms of conveying and communicating apprenticeship, and so that's another skill set, by the way. But it was all just simply immersion into the knowledge base. You cannot let other people learn for you. You have to get in there and learn it yourself. So for the last 18 months, I've done nothing but immerse myself in everything apprenticeship.
And have you become more experts in a certain industry sector, or you more generalist that you can work with any employer in any industry? Are you more focused on manufacturing or IT or healthcare? Talk a little bit about your industry targets, if you will.
Sure. We initially started in logistics with a company that had 13 apprentices, and then they increased it to 21 apprentices. And so we started in logistics, and then we eventually moved into advanced manufacturing, where we have approximately 35 apprentices along working in 8 different companies. And then we're moving into cybersecurity. That is our next focus, as well as the allied health field. And so we are, while we started in logistics and moved into advanced manufacturing, we are expanding into what we call those high demand industry sectors. And so we can now become more generalistic in terms of how we approach employers from various industry sectors, because we have that base of knowledge, that foundational knowledge of how apprenticeships work with regards to the on-the-job training and the related technical instruction. And so we can always speak foundationally across different industry sectors.
Okay, great. Well, I have on the screen just sort of an overview of how you serve your greater workforce development community and some of the things you do there. You've talked a little bit about some of the highlights of your program. I am curious, for your manufacturing, where you're working with 8 different companies, did you bring them all, as an intermediary, did you bring them all together to agree on a common occupation, common job title, common curriculum, or did you work with them individually?
We brought them all together because we had to. In order for the community college to really justify the cost of offering a course, we have to have a minimum number of students who are participating in that class. And many of the companies that we work with in advanced manufacturing are small companies. That means they have 20 employees or less. And so for the most part, they can only provide for 1 or 2 apprentices at a time. Some we do have that are larger, do have 8 to 10 apprentices, but for the most part, I would say in 90% of the cases, these are smaller firms that can only provide 1 or 2 apprentices at a time. As a result, we aggregated them in terms of occupation and in terms of curriculum. And I want to speak, if I may, just a little bit about curriculum and apprenticeship. For the most part, the community college will need to make significant changes to their curriculum to meet the demands of today's industry, especially in the areas of advanced manufacturing and information technology. And the reason is because there have been so many changes in technology in those areas that the companies that are now utilizing these machines that have enhanced technological features, the community colleges need to make sure that they are partnering with an educational platform that's able to deliver that kind of curriculum. And so we're happy to have a partnership with Tooling U that really brings us to a place where we can offer relevant curriculum to the employers, not just simply curriculum for curriculum's sake, but curriculum that actually speaks to the direct needs of the employers and their apprentices. And that's a very, very significant point. It's not just getting credits and getting a diploma or a certificate. It's making sure that the RTI is relevant and will actually enhance the ability of the apprentice to do their current job. That is very critical.
Right, and so that's important because, colleges, and this is very important, you brought up a couple of issues for colleges, right? You have to have a certain number of seats filled, but also, you may not have certain curriculum or credentials or certifications or part of the classes that employers want. So you're encouraging the flexibility in going out and finding those other courses and curriculum to bring into your existing programs. Is that right?
Yes, that's critical. And one of the things we realize is this: the employers want apprenticeship because they can see clearly the need to really develop their own workforce, because we have this gray tsunami that's happening, especially in the area of advanced manufacturing, in which a lot of people within 10 years or so are going to be retiring. And so our employers know that they really need to start developing folks, but they're asking the community college to bring the kind of curriculum that they need. And so we sit down with the employers. For example, our logistics company, we actually met with them and said, what do you want your apprentices to know to be able to be valuable to your company? And that was our curriculum. That's how we did it.
So great. So go ahead, one last thing, and I'm going to have to move on. Go ahead, Jeff. Sure.
And so the point here is this, that there's a couple of points I want to bring in. One, apprenticeship is a team effort. It's a collaborative effort, and some of our other speakers have already referred to this. And with our partnership with Goodwill Southern California, it has really enabled us to bring an apprenticeship that is easy to implement for the employers. That's what they want. They want ease of implementation. They want minimal administrative burden, and they want to make sure that the apprenticeship is going to be convenient for their apprentices, meaning the education needs to meet their apprentices where they are academically. And so that's how we make apprenticeship happen. That's how we're able to enjoy some of the accomplishments that we've been able to make happen in the past few months.
That's great, Jeff. So again, great example, great partnership with a very strong Goodwill partner. You've moved along very quickly in a short period of time, and a very interesting model, so thanks for sharing. Stick around, Jeff, we'll get back to you with some questions. So let's move on a little bit to our good friend Shelley Weir, Senior Vice President, Career Development with American Hotel and Lodging and Education Association. And Shelley, sorry to keep you waiting. We're saving my favorite until last. Notice I didn't say necessarily the best, just my favorite. But anyway, thanks for joining us today, Shelley. You oversee apprenticeship and work-based learning for the Hospitality and Lodging Association. So can you tell us just a little bit more about what you do? Welcome today.
Sure. Thanks so much, Eric. Thanks to the entire JFF team for having me on today. As Eric mentioned, I'm the Senior Vice President of Career Development for the American Hotel and Lodging Association, as well as our 501c3 foundation that sits within AHLA. And just a little bit about AHLA and kind of how we got started in the apprenticeship space. First and foremost, AHLA, of course, is the national trade association that represents the hotel sector here in the United States. We are very proud to have presidents and CEOs from all of the major hotel chains, Marriott, Hyatt, Hilton, Wyndham, Best Western, et cetera, that not only are members of our organization, but sit on our executive committee and board of directors and really drive the strategy of the association. We are also recognized globally as the certifying body of the hotel and lodging industry as well. And so as we think about how that work connects in with the apprenticeship space, I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. Just to kind of give you a sense of some of the folks that are members of our organization, I put a couple of the more popular names and chains on the screen to provide that visual. But in very simple terms, we have every other hotel that exists in the country as members of our organization. And obviously, we have hotels in large urban markets as well as small, more rural markets, and the apprenticeship program can help them with their talent needs regardless of size and type of location of property. So we are still, I like to say we're still relatively rookies in the apprenticeship space, especially considering some of the other industries that have been doing this for a lot longer. But we first stepped into this a little under 2 years ago. Our good friends and sisters and partners at the National Restaurant Association Educational Foundation approached us about working together on a joint project when the U.S. Department of Labor was releasing some opportunities for contracts for industry intermediaries. And we had been watching what apprenticeship had been doing, both in some other industries here in the U.S., as well as, quite frankly, what our own hotel industry had been doing in Europe and in Asia, most notably in the apprenticeship space. And so we were realizing that this was really a very valid and workable talent solution, and could we help to bring it here to the U.S. More broadly. And so in partnership with the Restaurant Association, we created something called the Hospitality Sector Registered Apprenticeship Program. And both organizations created, to start with, management-level registered apprenticeship programs. And we spent about 8 months working with Daniel's team at the Office of Apprenticeship to create a registered apprenticeship program for the position of lodging manager. And because we are the certifying body for the industry, essentially what we did is take all of the competencies that are included in 2 of the top-level industry certifications for supervisors and managers and use those to create the on-the-job training rotation for apprentices in our program. We also have some terrific partners at the American Hotel and Lodging Educational Institute, which is the curriculum and training side of the business, if you will. They also manage the day-to-day operations of our AHLA certification portfolio, and because of that, we were actually able to work with them to have some really exciting options for the related technical instruction. So our hotels that are in some of the more rural areas of the country that maybe don't have a community college or a 4-year university in their area with a hospitality program can actually have their apprentices take their RTI online directly from the Educational Institute. And then, of course, working very closely with the colleges across the country that do have either continuing ed or hospitality degree-seeking programs to offer them. So, our role as intermediaries, first and foremost, was really about educating the hotel industry through our own membership and through our own leadership, really at the top down, CEO level down, to talk about why apprenticeship could be a solution for their talent needs. And we really relied on Daniel's team at the Office of Apprenticeship to provide some good data and stats for us about how it had worked in other industries and use that to really kind of capture the attention of our hoteliers here in the U.S. And so we spent really the first year of this effort trying to change the perception of what apprenticeship was in the eyes of our hoteliers, as well as building and registering our program. And now in our second year, we're really starting to do the actual integration, actually enrolling apprentices. And we have apprentices working at more than 20 different hotel companies right now. And what we found really interesting was that a lot of our employers were far more interested in helping to upskill their current workers into management level positions through the apprenticeship program than potentially bringing in new hires. And we do have some that are focused exclusively on new hires and some that are doing a combination of both. And so it really allowed us to begin working with the public workforce system in a little bit of a different way than maybe what some of the other industries had done. And so we like to reach out as we start working with an employer. First and foremost, I completely agree with our panelists that talking to the employers first is paramount. You've got to figure out what needs they have and then figure out if the apprenticeship program is the right solution for those needs, and then begin to put together a strategy for how they will onboard the program into their portfolio. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see we are the sponsor of our apprenticeship program. And then we work through our coalition of association members, again, nearly 30,000 hotel members across the country, to help really spread the word and also onboard registered apprentices into our program, but work really collectively with education providers on the RTI offerings as well as articulation agreements, working very closely with the workforce boards, with schools, with community-based organizations to help source talent where a new hire fit is the best need or solution for that employer, and working very closely with Jobs for the Future to help educate our members as well on diversity and inclusion efforts to make sure that we are being inclusive throughout this effort. So with that, I'll stop. I know we're kind of running short on time.
Yeah, well, very thorough. You sort of took all my questions away because you answered almost everything I had, Shelley, but very, thank you for that. It's very helpful. So just a follow-up, though, you know, when you first got started doing, I mean, you're a major industry association, probably with the Department of Labor's future work in this area will probably focus more on industry associations. Was that the real hard part, sort of getting out there and making the, I guess, you know, making the sale to employers about what apprenticeship is, how to think about that, and to take that step to say, yes, I'll consider apprenticeship? Was that your hardest part of this work, is engaging the employers and getting them started?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there was really kind of two big challenges. The first is kind of taking the current, you know, registered apprenticeship regulations and seeing how they could work in our industry. The best example I can give, Eric, is the wage progression. You know, a general manager working at a Waldorf Astoria in New York City is making a very different salary than a general manager working at a Courtyard by Marriott in, you know, Des Moines, Iowa, for instance. And so really helping to put together with the Labor Department some baseline parameters that were adaptable to all the different types, sizes, and locations of properties that we represent across the country. And then to your point, absolutely, kind of getting the apprentices, or excuse me, the employers to take a leap of faith and try this out, especially since we didn't have any data to show them specific to our industry yet. You know, you're really kind of pitching them as being the first adopters. Now that we have those first adopters enrolled, it's about showing the next wave of employers the data and the success rates around retention and that type of thing, and how it's working in our industry. So we had to really lean on Daniel's team to give us some strong from the construction or manufacturing industry that we could show our employers to get them to take that leap of faith.
That's great. That's great. Well, you know, thank you, Shelley, and I know we're at time. I think we're going to, if our panel can stay, just go a few minutes over. I know some of our participants are mostly with us, but we want to get to a few of the questions here. And Shelley, I just want to start with you, and then I'll go to Jerry real quick. You know, a lot of questions about incumbent workers and doing apprenticeship with incumbent workers. That's sort of a more active twist we're hearing more about. That's been your strategy, right, Shelley, is to work exclusively with incumbents? And then, Jerry, after Shelley, maybe you could weigh in on that.
Yeah, definitely. In fact, Eric, we just did some data this week with our partners at the Restaurant Association, and of all of the apprentices that we currently have enrolled in the two programs, 80% of them are incumbent workers and 20% are new hires. So it certainly is an option for both strategies, but we are an industry that grows from within. You can literally go from dishwasher to general manager in a short amount of time, and the apprenticeship program helps to get them there. So yeah, we were very surprised that our employers leaned more heavily on the incumbent worker side than the new hire side coming out of the gates.
Great. Jerry, any comments on incumbents? Seems to be on the upswing.
Yeah, absolutely. So for every one of our employers, we always look at both populations, the ones coming in and the ones existing. And really, registered apprenticeship is just a framework for a workforce development solution that has education, it has mentoring, and it has wage gains. And that applies to incumbents as well as the new individuals coming in. So we always fashion the program, regardless of whether it's a CNC machine operator program, a pharmacy tech program, an IT software development program. We always look at both the new ones coming in and also the incumbent workforce to place them within the apprenticeship. Many of those already in the workforce, they're going to get credit for both the RTI and the OJL as part of the apprenticeship, but still they're participating, because what you want to do is craft an entire solution that encompasses a learning organization. And so just one small other point, you want to also identify those that are the journey workers within each occupation and celebrate their status as well.
Great. And also incumbents, Jeff, are you guys doing incumbent workers at Canyons?
Absolutely, because it mitigates risk. When you use incumbent workers, the employers really prefer incumbents over new hires because they have someone who knows the culture, someone who understands the company, and someone who has paid their dues, so to speak, that proves to the company they're going to be around through the apprenticeship experience. So it also enhances retention.
Got it. There one of the questions came in and asked about success stories to intermediaries. There are many out there on various sources on Center for Apprenticeship, our website. There are resources. There are some case studies and examples on our IMT program, on retail, and I believe hospitality as well. So there are some examples of intermediaries on the Center for Apprenticeship website under resources. You know, somebody asked a question about, you know, do states, you know, offer intermediary services? And, you know, Jerry, I'm going to go to you with that one. I mean, you know, states have increased, the Department of Labor and state apprenticeship agencies through additional funding and enlightenment, I think, have put more people out in the field to work with employers, more state apprenticeship navigators or Office of Apprenticeship Navigators to work with employers. They're not exactly intermediaries, but they certainly work with companies to help employers develop and register programs. Jerry, any observations on the support from state or federal agencies?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have actually, from Vermont High Tech's perspective, we have written NG, or National Emergency Grants, AAI grants, you know, the SAE grants, the SAA grants, all around apprenticeship with our departments of labor in both Vermont and New Hampshire. So we actually align ourselves very closely as the employer's voice and are co-partners in the writing of the grants, the solicitation for, and the use of the dollars for the grants, and supporting those employers. So not only are there, you know, opportunities for intermediaries to serve the actual departments of labor or economic development within your state, but you also can partner very closely with them. We could not be as successful as we are without the departments of labor in both Vermont and New Hampshire supporting what we're doing as a true partner. So all the recruitment that we do is side by side with our departments of labor or employment security in New Hampshire and economic development.
Right. And Shelley, as you all have gotten into this business, you mentioned that you work closely with DOL, registering national programs and what have you, but you know, you have, I imagine you have some of your hotel ownerships that have multiple properties across state lines. So sort of wondering, you know, what have you done? What's the advice you have for folks working with state apprenticeship agencies?
That's a great question. And, you know, when we first started this effort, that was something that was, you know, certainly a hurdle that we had to overcome. And so, you know, we worked really closely, again, with the Office of Apprenticeship and made the decision to do national program standards when we registered ours so that we could have operations in all 50 states. However, I will tell you that, you know, the opportunity to engage with the workforce system, not only purely from a fiscal perspective with the support that the workforce boards and others can offer, but also just from a purely partnership perspective for talent source and things of that nature, registering at the state level is important. And so what we've tried to do is begin to reach out to the different SAA states and take a look at whether or not they will accept our national program standards as is, or what changes we'd require based on what their state apprenticeship council, you know, requires. And then what we will do is then reach out to our members in that state to go over if there are any changes, is that acceptable or not. One of the best examples is we have our program registered in Arizona, an SAA state, which was done basically almost exactly like our national program standards, but then we also have them registered in Maryland, and Maryland had asked for a couple of things that we went back to our hotel members in Maryland to discuss, and the general consensus was that those changes were appropriate for that level. So, you know, just kind of being mindful of those things. I think, you know, to the other panelists' point, you've got to become really an expert in working with the SAAs and with the workforce system, and not to be repetitive, but that's again where we lean on the Office of Apprenticeship and their field folks as well to help us engage with the right folks to get that going.
Sure, great. Hey, just a number of questions, participants that we've received have been about the new Department of Labor IRAP system and process, and probably the only thing we can say about that, and I will defer to DOL, not to us, but, you know, they're rolling out, they're considering the task force report. You can go to USDOL/apprenticeship task force and you can look at the report from the Secretary's Task Force on Apprenticeship. The department will then be pouring through those recommendations and then making some sort of policy document in the coming weeks, I guess. I don't know the exact time frame. But as it relates to intermediaries, and this is a slightly different system that they're proposing, but we'll probably engage more industry associations. Not sure if they're national or local, where they'll be. We'll have to wait to hear from DOL on that. But I know a lot of the conversation is about how to get more industry associations like AHLA or manufacturing associations or IT associations into the apprenticeship game. So we don't have too many details on that now, so we'll leave it to DOL to clarify that so I don't make any mistakes on that. You know, there's a couple of questions about credentials. You know, every apprenticeship program, and Shelley, Jeff, Jerry, right, all of your programs end in credential. What sort of credential do they get from you, Shelley, at AHLA?
So they automatically qualify for the Certified Hospitality Supervisor, and then once they've been a general manager for a year, basically to qualify for the Certified Hotel Administrator, which is the top designation in our industry. It's basically the CPA for accountants is the CHA for hoteliers, if you will. Typically, they've got to be a GM for 2 years, but through the apprenticeship program, our certification commission allowed us to take 1 year off of that time and requirement. So once they're a GM for 1 year, after they've gone through the apprenticeship, they'll qualify for the top one, but they'll automatically qualify for the Certified Hospitality Supervisor. And of course, all of that content is in the program set up for them for success so that they can earn those credentials.
And then, of course, they get a DOL certificate of completion
Absolutely.
for the apprenticeship program, right? So they're
you
all
got
going
it.
to end result in that for whoever asked those questions there. Okay, let's see. I had another really good question, but I just lost it. But we're gonna have to wrap it up. Oh, I know. There's a very good question here. Jerry, I'm going to go to you first and then to Jeff, and then I think we'll just close it out. Thanks, everybody, for sticking around a little bit longer. The question was, how does an employer who's interested in apprenticeship go about finding a good intermediary in this area? I have a few ideas. It's a very good question. You know, you hope that intermediaries go out and find employers, but there might be an employer who's read an article in a local paper, who's heard about this and is interested in engaging with an intermediary. They can't do apprenticeship themselves. They don't have the knowledge, but they might want to. Jerry, what advice do you have for employers of how to connect with intermediaries who could help them?
So that's the one thing where I think JFF plays a crucial role. These kinds of like the Center for American Apprenticeships, things like that, which are out there on the web that employers are starting to Google. It's really those intermediaries of the intermediaries that actually really are key to success. So, you know, just again, hats off to JFF for actually having this webinar, but for also having a presence out there. And there are other ones like Mayor and Mayor, the Urban Institute, et cetera, that have footprints that really, when employers are starting to read about them, they go to those websites, and then from those websites, they link to the intermediary websites.
Right, and I would also say, Jeff, any advice you have for any businesses listening in about how do they do outreach? Do they go to their local community college? Not all colleges do this.
That's correct. And so they can go to their local community college, but also they can go to their Workforce Development Board or to their America's Job Center, which may have information as well. Also, the Division of Apprenticeship Standards would know who operates apprenticeship within their particular geographic area. And so for the state of California, the best source right now would probably be the Division of Apprenticeship Standards, who could help guide them into some to those intermediaries that could assist them.
Right, I think that's right. My advice for either employers or other partners who want to get involved is either to work through their state apprenticeship agency or their Office of Apprenticeship rep in their state. Not really hard to find. You know, it's a little uneven around the country. Some workforce boards do apprenticeship, in-depth apprenticeship work. Some don't really. Some colleges and more colleges are getting into the game of being sponsors and intermediaries, and more industry associations are getting involved. So, you know, hopefully get to the point where they check with their local or regional industry association, get connected with somebody who's knowledgeable in the region. You know, the important thing about this apprenticeship work, as I said early in the call, is a lot of it is regional ecosystems coming together to do this. You know, Shelley, you have a very interesting view because you're trying to do this nationally, but I'm guessing when push comes to shove, you're going to have to do these local partnerships to make it go.
No doubt, no doubt. You've got to have the local partners. At the end of the day, that's where the rubber meets the road, and we can have the CEO of any hotel company say yes, but ultimately we're going to be working with their local properties and then with the local community colleges and workforce system and SAA agency, if appropriate, to get it going on the ground.
Right. So the key thing with intermediaries is really developing those partnerships, and there are intermediaries that are really local to a city or a county or just a local area. There are statewide intermediaries who do it on behalf of the state in IT or cyber or maybe manufacturing or others. And then, of course, there are national intermediaries like Shelley and AHLA. So it's an interesting growth in this field. There's a lot going on in apprenticeship. And a lot of going on in intermediaries. I guess my one caution to the group is, don't go out and create and be an intermediary if you don't know what you're doing, right? It takes a lot of study, a lot of work, a lot of understanding of the system, and there are resources out there. Certainly JFF can help you, and some of the other organizations that Jerry mentioned to develop intermediaries. I think we've gone way over time, but we've really kept a lot of people with us, so I want to thank our panel for joining us today. Jerry Ghazi with Vermont High Tech, Jeffrey Forrest with College of the Canyons, and Shelley Weir with the American Hotel Lodging Association, Daniel Vallejo with the U.S. Department of Labor. We're going to try to answer as many of these questions as we can offline. We want to, on behalf of the Center for Apprenticeship and Work-Based Learning, we want to thank you for bearing with us and joining this. This will be recorded. We will be posting this on the website with the set of with the slide set that's there today. And lastly, we want to put a plug in for an event we're doing in June in New Orleans. It's called Horizons. It's JFF's biannual conference, probably about 700 people coming for a wider range of workforce workshops and sessions on not only just apprenticeship, but also the future of work, diversity and equity, and the impact of technology. It's June 12th in New Orleans. It's June 13th and 14th in New Orleans, and also there's an Apprenticeship Forward Collaborative Conference the day before that on June 12th. You can get information with that, Emma, we're on our website on both Horizons and the Apprenticeship Forward pre-meeting down in New Orleans. So on behalf of the panel, thank you for joining us, everyone, and we'll be doing another webinar shortly, and we'll make sure we notify you when we do that. Panel, thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we will be disconnecting. Thank you all very much.